5 simple ways to live happily free from porn. Can it be that easy? Well, it's that simple, but simple isn't always easy. We're going to break down the 5 basic precepts to living a happy life free from pain. And whether you know it or not, the addictive nature of pornography and the mental and physical health issues that it creates, like anxiety, depression, lack of focus, and erectile dysfunction, it causes a lot of pain in your life. So we're going to dive in this episode of Porn Brain Rewire with me, Dr. Trish Leigh. So I borrowed these ideas from a really beautiful book, The Experience of Insight by Joseph Goldstein, that I was recently reading on my vacay to Key West, where the roosters run free. So this book, if it's possible to highlight an entire book, that's exactly what I did. I have so many ideas gelling to be able to share them with you as it relates to leaving pornography behind. So we're going to start with this one. So in the book, Goldstein highlights 5 precepts, and I wanted to tell you what the definition of precept is because it hit so hard when I looked it up for you. This is the definition: a general rule intended to regulate behavior or thought. So as we dive into these ideas, you will find that neurological regulation, to be able to self-regulate your behaviors and thoughts, is crucial to leaving porn behind and being able to create the authentic life that you want and you deserve through these precepts. So regulating behavior and thought starts with your brain. So I love the idea that Goldstein uses precepts. So here's the 5 basic precepts. Number 1, not killing. So not taking another life or not harming any creatures. That's a basic precept of living happily, free from pain. Number 2, not stealing, only using what you own. Number 3, refraining from wrong speech. So this isn't just speaking the truth or talking truthfully, but it also includes using your words powerfully and not, as Goldstein says, engaging in frivolous or useless talk. It's being intentional in speaking. Number 4 is not committing sexual misconduct. And we're going to dive into this in just a second. And number 5 is refraining from intoxicants that dull your mind. So pornography is absolutely an intoxicant that dulls your mind, and it can lead to sexual misconduct, which we are going to dissect right now together. So the idea is sexual conduct is refraining from actions of sensuality that cause pain and harm to others or creates turbulence or disturbance in yourself. I'm going to say that again. So sexual misconduct, based on what Goldstein says in this book, is refraining from actions of sensuality that cause pain and harm to others or turbulence or disturbances in ourselves. So if you're acting out sexually in a way that is either objectifying or using another human, that doesn't feel good to you. And especially if it becomes morally incongruent with what you believe you want to do in your life and not meeting the expectations of the person that you want to be or that you think you are, that's where sexuality becomes sexual misconduct. And we are going to dive into this more. And of course, I've highlighted the 5 precepts: not killing, not stealing, not using wrongful speech, staying away from sexual misconduct, and staying away from intoxicants that dull the mind. Because what we're going to do is we're going to flip it to the opposite. If you're not going to do those things, what are you going to do? We're going to dig into that in just a minute. But the idea of sexual misconduct is that you're acting in a way sexually that brings you shame, and it doesn't compute because it is harmful to another person. That might be your partner. It might be a person that you're acting out with, or it creates turbulence or disturbance internally for you. Now, I work with thousands, tens of thousands of people who struggle with quote unquote sexual misconduct, not my word. I call it hypersexuality, who struggle with hypersexuality because their brains were conditioned to go back to hypersexuality to feel good. It's a dopamine dependency. So using this precept can be difficult for people because they dependent upon the high levels of dopamine that they are receiving from the intoxicant of pornography and from the hypersexuality that results. So breaking free from this behavior that is keeping you from being the best version of yourself or for reaching your full potential, that's what we're talking about here. So if you're not going to engage in these 5 behaviors, what are you going to do instead? Well, before we visit that, why do people engage in these behaviors? Why would someone kill? Why would someone steal? Why would someone speak wrongfully? Why would someone act out in a sexual way or imbibe and engage in intoxicants that dull the mind? Well, Joseph Goldstein in this book, he refers to 3 primary reasons that people are acting in this way and are using these behaviors. And it's the opposite of regulating a person's behaviors or thoughts. Number 1 is greed, wanting for themselves. So getting, taking, wanting. We know that dopamine is the molecule of motivation, more, and pleasure. So it can lead to narcissism, and it definitely can lead to this concept of greed. You want more. And he actually talks about sensuality or the senses of basically pleasure, bodily senses. It falls into this category of greed. Plus, societally, we live in a society of where it's not seen as an abundant society. It's seen as a competitive society where we have to take or somebody else is going to get it. Now, we're going to flip the switch on that one in a second, but greed is a primary reason that people act in these 5 ways. The second reason, hatred. Having hate in the heart and having ill will towards other people. There's a wide variety of reasons that this happens, but we know that dysregulation of the brain and the mind and body are at the core. No authentic inner child wants to harm another person. They do it out of hatred because of self-esteem issues, out of fear. One word for all of these things for me is fear, but there's greed and then there's hatred. The last one is so important when it comes to pornography consumption. So when a person develops a porn habit, usually it's in their youth or in adolescence. So at that point, they're exposed to pornography and it's high level pleasure from intense sexual experiences they've never been exposed to before. So this dopamine gets flowing in the brain and they feel good, and it's linked to whatever they're watching on the screen. Now, I refer to that as the seeds of addiction. And if you keep watering those seeds by going back to more porn over your lifetime, it can create the third aspect that Goldstein talks about, delusion. Delusion is what you see becomes what you want, becomes what you think about sexuality. Now, we know from science, many young people say that they consume porn to learn about sex. Unfortunately, the hypersexuality, the objectification, we know that when it comes to pornography, a lot of times the people who are not there by their own will. And there is a lot of camera angles and there's a lot of stuff going on to make what is being seen on the screen happen. It's not a natural experience. It is a performance for the fourth wall consumer, honestly, to get addicted to it because of the supernormal stimulus, high dopamine levels that result. So it results in delusion. Now you think that's what sex is supposed to be about. And honestly, this delusion can create delusion back in your life if you consume pornography enough. We know from science you will find your partner less attractive and you will be less satisfied with them physically and less satisfied in your relationship. At the same time, self-esteem tanks and bodily self-esteem tanks because you're comparing yourself to what you see in the screen. It can't compare. The dopamine in the screen, it is at very high level, 15 to 20. Natural healthy levels of dopamine are between 5 and 9, I would say, on an arbitrary scale. So now you're consuming something at a level 20 and you can't compare because your life and your world and your relationships and healthy sexuality is actually a 10-point spread away from what you've been consuming. This, in fact, is what leads to erectile dysfunction and sexual arousal dysfunction itself in all different flavors. So if you struggle with PE, DE, or if you have on the continuum, you're not able to perform in a way that you want to, sexual arousal dysfunction is a part of the gap in reality and delusion that pornography can create. Porn makes you sad. Sexual arousal dysfunction. So greed, hatred, and delusion are at the core of why people act out in these 5 ways. So for us, we're focused primarily on number 4 and 5, sexual misconduct and the intoxicant of pornography. The reason you go back is because your brain was dysregulated in those first few times that you found pornography, and your brain calibrated and adjusted to need more dopamine. So it needs the delusion of porn to feel good and ultimately to not feel bad. So those are our 3 reasons. Based on our 5 precepts, what can we do about it? The number one thing to do is to regulate your brain. Now we can do that using technology. That's the wonders of existing here in, 2024, moving into 2025. Technology exists that can rewire your brain for you. I know you're thinking cyborgs, but it's not. It's all healthy and non-invasive. It's only good for you, and it has nothing bad to offer. It's called a neuromodulation technique. Neuro meaning brain, modulation meaning changing. It modulates the way that your brain works. It takes it from a dysregulated or dysfunctional state towards a regulated state. It's like a workout for the brain. If you're interested in more information about that, please go over to drtrishleigh.com. You can check out the QEEG brain map. That's the assessment that I provide. I can see if your brain's using a dysfunctional pattern, and if so, how high, what magnitude of dysfunction you're using in every area of your brain. From there, I offer a professional coaching program using neurofeedback, a neuromodulation technique that regulates your brain for you. This is the fastest and easiest way to go from where you are right now, struggling with anxiety, depression, relationship problems, and ED, to the life that you want to be able to live, the life of happiness and joy, creating your authentic lifestyle. So check it out, QEG Brain Map. Okay, so regulating your brain at the core using technology is the easiest thing to do to get where you want to go fast. But now let's flip the switch on these precepts. So if you're not going to kill, what are you going to do instead? Well, you're going to do 3 things. You're going to do the opposites. We're going to do the opposites here so that you can live a new lifestyle. And what is the opposite of killing? The opposite of killing is being able to be compassionate, to have empathy, and to be able to have a worldview or perception of unity. So this is how I try to live. I try to be compassionate to myself and empathetic to others, compassionate to others, understand what people are going through or what they might be going through, and then think of us as all connected. When we were in Key West, we had a wild experience where the Hubs was almost arrested for literally crossing a street. The whole thing was really just out there. But even while it was happening, we recognized that the officer who was engaging in the behavior was very dysregulated. He was flying high up here and targeted my husband for a variety of reasons, not to do with him. There's some funny quotes going along with this, but targeted my husband because he was already up here. Our friend noticed that the officer's leg was all ripped up and bleeding from a different incident. So my husband was able to de-escalate the situation within minutes. I was actually quite impressed by him. He was able to take the officer from here to here, bringing him back down, and then we all walked away. But as we walked away, we're like, that is dysregulation at its finest, because we're crossing a street 1 second, and this officer's got my husband's hands behind his back in an attempt to handcuff him. it wasn't even jaywalking. It was just crossing a street, doing nothing illegal. But there was a lot of assumptions made on the officer's part because he was dysregulated. He assumed we were drunk. He assumed we were not listening to him. He made a lot of assumptions, none of which were true. So the de-escalation was very quick because my husband was able to stay very regulated. But it goes back to compassion, empathy, and unity. So we weren't even mad. I mean, we were trying to make sure the situation went well as we got out of it, but there wasn't really anger on our part because we were regulated. We're like, that guy's having a rough day. He made a mistake when it came to what was going on in our situation. And what my husband said to him to de-escalate the situation is, this is a misunderstanding. My husband said to him a few times, this is a misunderstanding. And finally he came down and he's able to go, this is a misunderstanding. So compassion, empathy, unity. That's the opposite of killing. What about stealing? So stealing is you feel like you need to take because you're worried about lack. So the opposite of that is generosity. It's giving to others and knowing that it's abundance, that there's plenty of what you need to show up for you. You know, I grew up with a scarcity mindset, so I have to challenge myself to be generous all the time. And as I was reading this book, I realized I'm doing really well because he actually categorized it into 3 different levels of generosity. Number 1 is beggar's generosity, where you only give away your scraps. Number 2 is friendly generosity, where you're trying to be a little bit better about it. And level 3 is king's generosity. You give away the best of what you have. And I realized as I was reading it, I'm doing pretty well, moving from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, because I'm much more willing to give these days, being brought up in a family that does not really give at all. So generosity, gratitude is number 2, and temperance. So being able to give in a generous way. Temperance is tempering what you need and, you know, not having a take mentality, but having a give mentality and having a mentality of feeling content. So there's a feeling in many people that they need more, 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 more. I actually had a client once who had a tattoo that read less is more. And as he got deeper into his addiction and into the intoxicant of pornography and into the narcissistic bubble that it creates and the greed that comes along with it, he had his tattoo changed to say more is more. It used to say less is more, and then he changed it to more is more. You can just see that in getting that tattoo changed, it was a shift in regulation to dysregulation, from, you know, feeling generous to needing to take, and more is more to get, and, you know, going from reality to delusion. So this all exists, you know, on a continuum, and we want to move you from where you are to where you want to be. Gratitude is essential, being grateful for what you have. And at any level, you can be grateful for what you have. Yes, you can be striving for more. Temperance is arriving at where you are and remembering that the gift of life today is such a beautiful thing. Being grateful for what you have in the moment, being present, and being able to say, this is a beautiful life, creating the beautiful life that you want, but then being able to sit in it for a few minutes and go, this is wonderful. Every single day, I try to find the gratitudes. I try to go for breadth across different things, and I try to go depth. Like today, I hung out with my 2 sons, Declan and Seamus. It just kind of happened on accident, and then I wouldn't walk away from it because it was such a beautiful gift of being able to hang out with my young adult men, children, for 2 hours. We were on the back porch, and typically I would not do that because I have work that I need to do. I refused to break from that until somebody else walked away. And it was such a beautiful gift. And I'm so grateful for those moments with them. That's what I'm talking about. Gratitude. Okay. Now moving on to speech. So if we're not going to use our words for ill intent, and if we're not going to be frivolous and have quote unquote useless words, what are we going to do? Well, you might not realize I started my educational journey as a speech language pathologist. Some people mock me for it, but guess what? I'm very proud of it because I always focused on language and cognition, which led me to thinking about cognition, which is thinking, which led me to meta, which is thinking about thinking, which led me to how can I help people reach their full potential and be their best selves through neurological regulation. So when it comes to speech, language is very important. How you talk to yourself and how you talk to others is an extension of your thinking. So you can change your own thinking by changing the way that you speak. So not only is it not being frivolous, it's about using language to empower yourself and others. And you can do it in powerful ways or overtly, but you also can do it in subtle ways. One thing the Hubs and I have been talking about lately, because we've been working on our taxes. Yes, I know what you're thinking, but it's been a crazy year. We submitted our taxes and we always use the term write-offs. And my brother-in-law, who is in the world of finance, he's like deductions. So, just a shift in not talking about write-offs, but talking about deductions, like shifts our mindset from wanting to quote unquote write things off to having deductions in our business. And we've caught ourselves so many times, and he's caught me, of course, saying the word write-off as we were doing our taxes and talking to our friends. But even that alone can shift us from wanting write-offs to thinking about deductions to having a savvier mind when it comes to business. So when it comes to the way that you talk to other people, recognize how you're using language, use it to empower yourself and other people. Now, sexuality, number 4, moving on. How do you create healthy sexuality? First and foremost, you have to bring your brain out of this hypersexual mode where it's looking for sexuality for dopamine hits. Remember, it's a dopamine dependency. It's not necessarily about sex. It got linked to sex, but it still makes it that it's your job to unlink it, the dopamine from sexuality, and relink the dopamine to your life, to your job, to your partner, to your people, to your hobbies. So how do you do that? You create healthy sexuality with your partner. Sex is not supposed to be just about dopamine. So it's about not looking for high levels of sensuality and body pleasures, but about a connected experience that allows for you to have the happiness trifecta. That's dopamine for pleasure, serotonin for joy, and oxytocin for connection. That's what we're talking about. Getting intentional in your relationship, building intimacy and connectedness through sexuality. Now, if you don't have a partner, you can start by building deeper intimacy, even with work colleagues, connecting at a deeper level, being more vulnerable, opening yourself up to connect with other people so that you can feel that unity of the human condition and start building kind of a tribe of your own to feel comfortable with. It's also important to get into the world and engage in healthy activities like your hobbies if you're looking for a partner, so that you put yourself in a position to be around like-minded people that you feel comfortable with, because you're going to increase the chances of finding a like-minded, emotionally mature partner. That's the sexuality part. You got to throw yourself out there in an emotionally mature way and wait for it to come back to you. All right. Number 5, intoxicant, especially the intoxicants of porn. So the idea is, if you're going to porn to shift you into artificial neutral, which that's why people go, because they're trying to shift out of stress or boredom into good feelings as quickly as possible, you are using it as an intoxicant. It is dulling your mind. And this is what Goldstein says, is that it actually disinhibits your mind so that you no longer follow the other precepts. So you use the intoxicant to break down the idea of, it's okay to go against other people. It's okay to take things that aren't mine. And that can even be in sexuality. It's okay to use my speech and language in a way that might be harmful or frivolous. It's okay to engage in sexual misconduct. That's what the intoxicant does. Recognize that. Porn's doing that to your sexuality. It'll be almost impossible to create healthy sexuality while dulled and disinhibited from the intoxicant of porn. That is why it is very imperative to be able to do that. Now, before we wrap up, I want to revisit the idea of delusion from pornography. What's the opposite of delusion, right? So we know that the opposite of greed is sharing and connecting, unity. The opposite of hatred is compassion and empathy. What's the opposite of delusion? This is so interesting. The opposite of delusion is reality. The opposite of delusion is disillusion. So I love this because right now you might be under the illusion that pornography is the sexuality that you want, or you might be under the illusion that pornography is how sex should be in the real world. You might be under the illusion porn isn't bad for you. I would love for you to become disillusioned, which means you join back in reality of life is the important thing, not the escapism of porn, and that you don't want that anymore. You want to be able to approach and engage your real life and get on purpose in your work, get back to business and creating a healthy relationship and doing the hobbies that you love. When that whole thing was going down with the officer, my husband, the officer, looked down for a moment. Actually, I have my phone here and it's absolutely adorable. I made it my screensaver. The officer looked down for a moment, and my husband gave me the most adorable look of reassurance. And he told me, I made it my screensaver because he told me that the reason he did that is he knows how stressful that probably was for me. He wanted to let me know that it is okay, that he had it handled. And I told him that our relationship points went up. Oh, our relationship points went up 1,000,000% with this subtle glance. And, that's what this is about, getting connected with your people again, disillusionment, so that you can join us back in reality. And then when you are in reality, it's about authenticity and creating the life that you want. Okay. I hope this helps you out. I hope it inspires you and empowers you to commit to quit. Commit to quit with me. If you need more help, please go over to drtrishleigh.com. Porn Free Brain Forever is there for you. It's a digital program, but it's a hybrid where I offer group coaching one time a month. So when you get into that program, you have lifetime access. It's 100 lessons you move yourself through, but I help you in group coaching. If you want to meet with me personally and have your brain mapped so we can see if you have dysfunction and what levels, please join me in a QEG brain map so we can spend an hour together on Zoom breaking down what your brain needs to regulate itself so you can regulate your behaviors to follow these 5 precepts to live a happy life free from porn. Okay, I hope it helps you out. And until next time, control your brain or it'll control you.